Huh? Did you show it for me? Did he? It's well.
It was
This is hard so I don't know if I'm going to do this tomorrow because the rest of the winter it's been light, so cold. But this morning,
I do show it. It's not that I just have the
hey Prasad,
Hello.
welcome. You can sit in front row with us.
Who is there?
And
Chair.
me.
Oh, you are, okay. You are there, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I got confused.
Yeah.
Your speakers in the line have.
Yeah, it does have still function.
No, don't worry. It may be early.
Can you turn the speakers on the computer up?
My computer, these speakers are not that powerful. And like, since the feed is being directed to the TV,
It probably
mine
cuts it
doesn't
out,
even play it.
You need audio?
No, just a small video clip. I'll talk through it. It's okay. So, I'm
We
ready.
just listen carefully.
Okay.
But I have one general question about the title. Seems to me that you are making one head from two heads. You are not keeping them separate, right?
Oh, explain again. You're over my head.
No, I'm just saying you are not keeping two heads separate. You are making one head out of from two heads.
Somebody help me.
No, I'm just saying. I know you. Now you are combining ITS and the other one.
CITS.
Collaborative, right?
Uh-huh.
One.
Yeah.
And so you are making one head from two heads. So
Yeah, you're looking at it that way. And now I get you. Okay. So when I say two heads, I mean two student heads. Like me and you
I
are
see,
working
I
together.
see, okay.
And that's just better than
Oh,
me.
I see, that's what you mean.
Yeah, good point. I get you. Okay, so with that, we are starting. Thank you all for coming today for my presentation. The weather's not that great, but you guys have favored me with your presence. For those of you all who don't know, my name is Rachel Harsley. And today we're going to be talking about collaborative intelligent tutoring systems. We'll be reviewing 4 of the papers that I looked over for the WCP. So, what is a collaborative intelligent tutoring system? As Professor Sistla just said, it's a combination of 2 different fields. Intelligent tutoring systems known as ITS and CSCL, which is computer supported collaborative learning. So do a little fuzzy math and you get CITS, and I'll just call that CITS for the purpose of the presentation. So we'll start off just by overviewing these 2 fields, intelligent tutoring systems and CSCL. And then I'm going to introduce a framework which I use to evaluate those 4 papers. And finally, we'll look at those 4 papers. So we'll begin. What about tutoring? At UIC, we have so many tutoring services. Just Googling UIC and tutoring, there's 13 different options that pop up. So no matter what you're looking for on campus, you can get help with from the ACM, from the Writing Center, from all these different networks. And it must be for a reason, right? Unless we're just throwing away our dollars. There's something about tutoring. So we ask the question, why tutoring? Why do we tutor? Why do we receive tutoring from humans? Well, it boils down to one thing, and that's about learning gains. When people are tutored, it seems to correlate to their learning. So the question of what do tutors offer has sort of guided the research in intelligent tutoring systems. It's all about understanding how people are gaining knowledge from these tutors. So one thing you'll see with intelligent tutoring systems is that it often parallels a human tutor. So if we're looking at a human tutor, how many of you all have tutored before, by the way, or been tutored? You guys are geniuses. Okay, a few of you all have been tutored. I've been tutored and I've been a tutor. So we want to look at what a good human tutor does. And normally they have a knowledge of the subject. They need to know what their domain is. They have an understanding of the student that they're working with. They also have to know how to teach, how to present that information. If they can't convey it to their students, it's useless. So we find the analogous things within intelligent tutoring systems. We see that the knowledge of the student is represented in the domain module. We see that the understanding of the student is represented in the student module. So here the intelligent tutoring system is understanding what a student is good at, what problems they might not understand, even the affective state of the student, like if they're happy today, or if it seems like they really don't want to be using the tutoring system. And further, just as a human teacher needs to know how to convey that information, so does the intelligent tutoring system. So they have a tutoring module which allows them to direct how they're going to do their pedagogical guidance. And finally, since we are using a computer interface, we need a user interface, some way to connect with the student, and that's normally through keyboard, mouse, video, text input, those type of things. So this is just our current generation ITS. It's represented by those 4 modules. So let's take a look at an intelligent tutoring system. This is actually Wei Outpost. It's one that we're going to have a closer look at later. And as you can see, it's similar to what you would do in a tutoring session with a human. You would have a problem presented. You would have an area to choose what your answer is or work out what your answer is. And this tutoring system actually displays something similar to a human tutor, and this is called a pedagogical agent. This animated smiling guy, his name is Jake, and he gives you your feedback. So after you click a solution, Jake is animated and he'll say, hey, great job, or he'll say, no, you didn't do that wrong. You didn't do that correctly. So that's just one type of intelligent tutoring system, but they differ a lot. And this is the video clip. I'm sorry the audio isn't working for it, but as you can see, there are other types of intelligent tutoring systems where this one is more game-based. So you're situated in a distant land, and the goal of this tutoring system is for you to learn both culture and language. So in here, you're acting as a soldier, and you're able to communicate with the people from that land, and you're also able to check your vocabulary and practice politeness, which seems like something that, what, does the intelligent tutoring system teach you politeness? Yes, it can even teach you those type of things. So this is just an example of game-based learning. And finally, just another example of intelligent tutoring system. This is Assessments, which is another popular intelligent tutoring system for math education. And with this one, there's no embodied agent who's communicating with you. You're only receiving your help through just textual feedback. So intelligent tutoring system seems great, right, everybody? Everyone's excited about them. This guy, he's loving his intelligent tutoring system. He's working on his math problems, but he wants to work with his friends. There's something about us as humans where we often enjoy working with each other, but not so fast, because our current module, our current understanding of intelligent tutoring systems normally limits it to individual tutoring. So it's one person working with an exclusive desktop system. So it's obviously the agent and the student, and they're bidirectionally communicating. That's great, but what we want to understand is that there might be a potential to do more with these powerful computers that we have. So as humans, I'm really not that great at understanding Muhammad at the same time I'm understanding Barber. But the computer has some amazing power where it can process an understanding of both students at the same time and be able to work through that to perhaps improve collaboration among the students and, of course, their overall learning gain, which is the goal of the tutoring system. So this leads us to computer-supported collaborative learning, which is the other field that makes up CITS. And computer-supported collaborative learning, the whole focus of it is to structure activities around the computer such that students are able to achieve the greatest learning gains both individually and as a group. So all computer-supported collaborative learning is about is understanding group dynamics and understanding how to better them through technology. So one might ask, why can't we just throw everybody in front of the intelligent tutoring system and that solves the problem? Well, what we find is in the computer-supported collaborative learning literature, it's saying that not just putting everybody in a group, that's not going to solve the problem. That won't lead to effective collaborative learning necessarily. You have to structure the activities in a way to bring about the learning. So they come up with this term called knowledge generative interactions. And these are what are required for effective learning. This includes giving explanations, engaging in argumentation, negation, conflict resolution, and even mutual regulation. These are the type of activities that are needed when collaboration is going to be effective. So just as ITS had architecture, CSCL also has an architecture. It consists of components and mechanisms. Components are very simple. Those are the things that make up the activity. Well, specifically, the participants, the groups, the roles that the participants have, the resources that they're allotted, and the activities that they'll be participating in. And the mechanisms, they consist of how the groups are formed, how the resources are distributed among the groups, and how the groups work in time. So for instance, at time step 1, the group may do activity A. However, in time step 3, the group should be doing activity B. And that's what sequencing is. So CSCL is pretty awesome. However, the one thing that's lacking in this area is that the support is often fixed. So once an activity is set up, there's no altering of the activity in order to accommodate. So if we began a peer review activity and for some reason Nick decided to leave the group, most of the support for CSCL doesn't accommodate this change. And in the same way, it doesn't accommodate the level of group interactivity that's present. So some groups, they might already work together pretty awesome. Me and Anos, we've worked in groups several times throughout my course here. So we might not need the same type of support as another group who's never worked together. So our question is, how do we merge these two fields? How do we merge CSCL and ITS to make the most effective learning? Well, we see we're getting benefits from both sides. CSCL has given us the foundation of what makes effective group learning, and it also has given us what kind of tools are most effective for this learning in terms of a human-computer interaction interface. And ITS has allowed us to model the students and make our learning adaptive to meet the needs of the student and their level of skill and also their effective state, with a high emphasis on artificial intelligence. So with that, the merging of the two, we have our CITS. And because we're sort of making a new field, we're forming a new field, we need a way to evaluate. So this is something that I've introduced in my paper, a form of evaluating these CITS. First, we look at how they're modeled. And this is bringing together the student and the domain module, which we found in the ITS system. We look at group dynamics, and this is really concerning the participants, groups, roles component that we saw in the CSCL architecture. We look at the collaboration cues, which is about the sequencing mechanism, which we saw in the CSCL architecture. We also want to examine pedagogical guidance, which is looking at the tutoring module, which was in ITS, and also looking at the activities components from CSCL. And finally, we look at technology, which is the resources that the students are allotted in the CSCL architecture, and it's also the user interface from ITS. So this framework is really a merging of the two different fields in order to evaluate these papers, which are a mix of the two. So let's jump right in. The papers that I looked at, the first one was regarding cognitive tutor algebra, and as you can imagine, it's all about working with algebra. Students are presented with a problem, they have an area to work out their solution, and they have an area to submit their solution. They can also ask for hints and just progress along and see their skills. Cognitive tutor algebra is made by Carnegie Mellon, as you see at the top, is Carnegie Learning, but it's an algebra learning system, and it's used in over 2,600 U.S. classrooms, so it's considered to be a pretty big intelligent tutoring system. And the baseline works with only individual tutors. But we'll see for my paper, they extended this to be peer-to-peer tutoring. So instead of the individual working exclusively with this tutor, they're working with a peer. So there were 3 conditions in this paper. First, there was just the individual tutoring condition. Then there was the peer tutoring condition with fixed support. And finally, there's a peer tutoring condition with adaptive support.
Actually, sorry, what does support mean here? I should have asked earlier. Yeah, what is support?
No problem. So support in this sense for the peer tutor is how the cognitive tutor, which is the computer, is giving them feedback. So there's
Oh,
a
I see.
2D on one hand, there's a peer tutor, and then above them is the cognitive tutor, and the cognitive tutor can intervene at different times and suggest how their interaction could be improved.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the goal of this research really was to examine two different questions. First was to see if collaborative learning with the ITS is even better than individual learning with an ITS. And the second question was to compare adaptive support versus fixed support in the collaborative setting. So just in a further look at these conditions, if this is just a glimpse of the first condition, which is the individual tutor, nothing too complex. The students are presented with a problem. They have to solve algebra equations step by step. They're given feedback. They're also given hints. And of course, they can see their skill level and completing this type of problems. And the second condition, which was the peer tutoring with fixed support, you'll see that you're able to understand what your partner is doing. You're able to see how you're being ranked in terms of your skill, and you're also able to chat with your partner. Now, in the fixed support condition and the adaptive support condition, they actually had two different phases. One was the preparation phase, and the second was the collaboration phase. In the preparation phase, students are working with the tutoring system on an individual basis and basically training on the problems that they're later going to tutor. So if I know I'm going to tutor problem 1, then in the individual preparation phase, I'm going to do problem 1 and receive feedback as if I was working with the cognitive tutor by myself. And then the collaboration phase is when they actually work in pairs to solve a problem. So one student is assigned as tutee and the other student is assigned as tutor, and their job is to mark the answers of the student and to give them feedback that will help them become better at algebra problem solving. So the difference between the fixed support and the adaptive support condition is pretty simple. In the adaptive support condition, the students, the peer tutor, if they give an incorrect answer, incorrect marking for the 2T, then the computer intervenes and says, you did this incorrectly, you should probably tell your partner to fix this. Whereas in the fixed support condition, if a peer tutor marked an answer correct and it was incorrect, the system did nothing to stop this process and students were able to move on. So that's the difference in the conditions. So if we look at the results from this, first of all, we saw that students in the collaborative condition, they completed far fewer problems in order to achieve the same learning conditions as the students who were in the individual learning condition. And the author said this might have been due to the control of time. However, there's also some literature that does support that collaborative learning can be more efficient than individual learning in terms of being able to complete fewer problems and get the same learning output.
Sorry, can you explain why? I mean, if they control of time means that clearly it took them longer to solve the problems when they were collaborating, right?
So,
but why did it come into they did achieve the same learning gains with fewer problems and same amount of time. So I'm not sure why time is a concern here.
yeah, I think they're saying if the students had the same number of problems and then they measured the learning gains based off that, there might have not been a difference in the learning gains. However, because they only had the same amount of time and fewer problems, there seemed to be a difference in the learning gain.
But I read that result as saying that with far fewer problems, they achieve the same learning, right?
Yeah.
So it sounds like a good...
Yeah, it does seem like a good thing, but I think the authors wanted to let us know that they did control for time, so that might have been significant.
So did they achieve the same learning gains in shorter time, you're saying? Or
No,
just
everybody
shorter
had
time?
the same amount of time, each condition. And of course, to answer their first research question, which was whether collaborative learning was different than the individual learning, there are actually no significant learning gains between the conditions. We also saw that students made a parallel number of errors in all three of the conditions. And we also saw that tutor feedback, when it was in response to a student asking for help, and when that feedback was really elaborated, meaning more than just yes or no, that tutors saw learning gains.
Sorry, is the tutor the human peer tutor, or is it the cognitive tutor?
Peer tutor.
Yeah.
Yeah, so looking at the learning gains, I'm either going to talk about the peer tutee or the peer tutor. Viewing tutee errors and problem solving, places where they were stuck, that also helped tutor learning. And moving on without correctly solving the problem, of course, as we can imagine, that correlated to negative learning gains for both tutor and tutee. And when the tutor withheld the feedback that it received from the system during the adaptive support condition, that negatively correlated with tutee learning, whereas on the other end, when it did communicate the feedback that was received from adaptive support, that often helped the tutee in their learning gains. So that concludes our CTA tutor, and we will go back and visit it a little bit in terms of using the framework to evaluate. The second paper that I looked at was Rashi. Rashi is different than cognitive tutor algebra because it's learning in an ill-defined domain. Rashi is about learning biology for students, and what they're doing is exploring patients and trying to diagnose them. So the students have access to video, have access to chat, and from there, they're trying to figure out what the illness is that the patient might be suffering with. So with that, students are equipped with their inquiry notebooks, and that's basically their place where they outline what they're thinking about the patient and their hypotheses. So Rashi, the goal of this study was to explore whether a knowledge base can be used to map the student's textual entries to an understanding of what the student is actually talking about and mapping it to content from the knowledge base. So here, the Rashi system, when it first came out, students were able to just access each other's notebook and write comments in it. But what they found was students were often writing lots of comments, but they were off task. So I could have been talking about the Bulls game or the White Sox inside of this entry. So in order to fix that and improve the structure of the system, they decided to make it critique rebuttal. So students, instead of just being able to make general comments, they were instructed to make a critique on someone else's notebook entry. So after making a critique, the author of the notebook could then serve up a rebuttal in terms of what their hypothesis is and what they have wrote in their notebook. And once students are entering in this information, once they're communicating via chat and via these critique rebuttal features, the goal of Rashi was to take this text entry input and try to map it to the knowledge base. And the knowledge base here is represented as an acyclical graph where many experts from several different fields, from biology to chemistry, had made their hypotheses about diseases and how they're related. So in the results for this paper, Rashi's knowledge base mapping was agreed with the independent judge 88% of the time in judging whether a student was on task or off task in terms of their commenting in the notebooks. Also, not only that, the Rashi was able to agree with the independent judge 70% of the time and actually identifying what it was that the student was talking about. So if the student was talking about hypertension, Rashi could figure that out, not just whether the student was on task or not. The third paper that we looked at was weighing outposts. This is another mathematics tutor, and it accommodates mathematics learning all the way from 4th grade to high school, and it's used in order to improve tests on students' performance on standardized tests. And the problems can be presented as word problems or as standard graphical problems. And we see that with weighing outpost, students' learning was definitely improved, an average of 20% just with 4 to 5 hours of using the system to study on a standardized test for the state of Massachusetts, which is where this was piloted. So weighing outposts is, again, an individual tutor, but what they wanted to do was extend it to be a collaborative tutor for the sake of the study. So how they did this, they were doing the exploration of what they called natural collaborations. What are natural collaborations? Well, it's really simple. You just turn to your neighbor and you guys can partner together. And what you do is enable the system instead of progressively forcing the student in their path of learning, which is what most of the intelligent tutoring systems do. They allow the students to choose which problem they're going to work on. And in this way, me and Muhammad could choose to work on the same problem as we sit next to each other. So it was exactly the same as the individual tutoring, except students could navigate to a problem of their choice and in that way work with their neighbor.
Sorry, but each of them still has their own
Computer.
copy of the tutoring system running.
Yes,
Okay.
each of them still have their own desktop.
Okay.
So after doing this was piloted in 3 different classrooms. What they did was analyze the data from these interactions with the students, and they marked the type of interactions that were occurring. There was 3, the top 3, they're considered disengagement behaviors. These are when students are probably cheating through the system or moving too quickly or doing things that are just a sign of them not being involved in their learning process. Whereas these 3 were the productive behaviors. These are when students are solving the problem, they're getting a hint and using that hint to solve the problem, or they're just answering it without even any help. And the final was a neutral condition where students were clicking to see hints, but this was not necessarily cheating. This could be that the students were just trying to learn from an example. So again, these 3 were considered disengagement behaviors, where the bottom 3 were considered productive behaviors. The results from this study showed that students who were working as collaborators, they were 10% more likely to have productive behaviors, whereas those who were collaborators were 6% less likely to show disengagement behaviors. And the final paper that I looked at was Basilica. As you can imagine, it's architecture, but not that type of architecture. It's actually an architecture for building kits. And Basilica, as I said, it's an architectural toolkit, and it helps designers to make collaborative intelligent tutoring systems. And it uses an object-oriented approach to do this, where the designers are putting together different components that will guide the system. The whole purpose of this was to be able to enable complex interactions that can vary, as opposed to limiting your system to one specific domain and one type of interaction. So the system was based off basically a model reflex agent, which many of you all have seen if you had artificial intelligence. And the agent is able to receive a percept from the environment, whether that be a student texting them a certain message or clicking on them. And then based off that, the agent updates their internal state and decides what behavior is going to be sent back to the environment. So with this simple architecture, the system allows you to build all different types of intelligent tutoring systems. One that the paper introduces is the Second Life tutor. Yes, it's a tutor for Second Life, the game. So students are able to interact with the tutor. Once they greet the tutor, either by clicking them or by directing a message toward them in the game, the greeting actor is activated, and from that, the greeting activator sends some output back to the student environment in Second Life, meaning like, "Hi, Rachel." And also at that point, the tutoring manager is activated, which is actually powered by Tutalk, which is a dialogue system for intelligent tutoring systems. And then the student is able to be tutored just by using the tutoring manager, which in this case, again, was the Tutalk dialogue system. The main thing, the main benefit of the Basilica architecture is that it allows the customization of these interactions and of these intelligent tutoring systems. It's all implemented in Java, and it provides these 6 baseline classes that you're able to abstract, or that you're able to override and use for your system. So there can be many different types of interaction strategies, and basically this paper just went over several uses of them. One strategy that the tutor can implement is aspirin ready. So just like in a human tutoring situation, I might say, go ahead and tell me when you're ready to work on this next problem. So this tutor does the same thing. They say, type help with max PK whenever you're ready. And the student later on in their dialogue, when they're ready, they can type the tutor and they move on the lesson in that way. Also, they can do other types of interaction strategies. One thing that we see is becoming prominent in intelligent tutoring system research is understanding affective states of students. So just as when you're working with a human tutor, you would like that tutor to be pleasant, you would like them to be encouraging, and you would like them to say things that are sort of helping you in a positive way. So another study of this paper was using the wrench talk tutor to do positive social interactions. And what they saw was that students, when they're encouraged, they really like the tutor more than standard tutoring systems, which were just giving problem feedback. So with that, those are the 4 papers. And we needed from there to somehow synthesize, come up with something that brings them all together and that helps us to understand more about kids. So this is what I introduced in my WCP paper, which is a way to classify the different kid systems and a way to understand the features that they are allowing us to use. So these are the same categories that I introduced to you all but we'll take earlier. So we'll take a deeper look at these and actually apply them to the system. So first of all, we looked at.
Sorry, can you go back because I had 2 questions on the table. One, the star in the what?
I'm sorry. I think the star was an error.
Okay.
Yeah, the star was an error. It only should have been the pluses at the bottom. I'm sorry.
Okay. But then the next question is, the line, 2 lines below the star.
Okay, system restricts.
No, the one above.
Okay.
Where, how come it is students must use their own tools, but it's in the semi-structured condition?
Yeah. So in Rashi, the students they're provided with the notebook and they're provided with chat. However, what I'm trying to say is, if students wanted to use email instead, they can do that and still finish their problem goals.
Okay.
So actually, I don't understand this table well.
Yes, I can walk through
So, what are these ticks? I mean, what are now you're comparing these, the 4 different papers here, or?
it. No, so I'll walk through it with you.
Yeah.
Tom, was yours the same question?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so for example, if you consider provides individual support, it can be unstructured or semi-structured.
Yes, or
fully
fully structured.
That's what you mean.
Exactly.
I see that. Okay.
Okay. So moving ahead, we'll look at these as we examine the papers again. So the first category that we had was modeling, and again, that's taken from the ITS architecture, the student and domain modules. So in terms of these 4 papers that we looked at, which ones provide individual support? Well, all 3 of them are able to provide individual support. Which ones actually use an individual or a group model to provide collaborative support? Those are only CTA and Rashi. We see that one thing that Wang Tutor is lacking with the natural collaboration is it has no knowledge of who is actually collaborating. And that seems to be a real weakness because you're unable to structure a collaborative activity without knowing the baseline of who is collaborating. All 3 of them support the domain learning, the goal of domain learning. So whether that was mathematics, algebra learning, or whether that was biology learning, all 3 support the domain learning. However, only CTA and Rashi support learning effective collaborative behavior. So Rashi explicitly, their goal is to teach students to be better collaborators. So once they recognize the content that the student is providing, say for instance, I'm good at understanding about hypertension, and for Nick might be just learning that. Based off their understanding and their content recognition of what I'm typing, they suggest that I partner with Nick. So this is actually building collaborative partnerships and helping students to engage in that behavior. CTA sort of takes a glimpse at this, but they really don't go deep in terms of promoting effective collaborative behavior. Their only intervention is when a tutor does an incorrect action, whereas CTA could be better at promoting effective tutoring skills. So if it knows that tutors are more encouraging, perhaps it should just at the beginning of a problem say, don't forget to encourage your peer tutor, your peer tutee. So these type of simple things. Whereas Wang, it has no knowledge, of course, of collaboration within the system, so it doesn't provide any support on collaboration. What I did notice the other day when I went to Wang's website just to run it again, they've added a feature which seems to make more sense. They allow you now to choose who you're working with, so the system now does have a knowledge of who you're working with, which seems to make sense. If we look at the group dynamics component again, this is taken from. Go ahead.
Just turn back just one maybe. In the study that you read about the use of Wang, I mean, another possibility is that the teacher or some adult in the room is providing the script. So I wondered, did they talk about the conditions under which the kids used it and what sort of prompts or scaffolds human scaffolds they might have had in addition to what the system provided?
Yeah, so it seemed like their main premise was that students are walking into the lab and they're most likely sitting by their friends. So instead of the teacher normally saying you should focus on this, the teacher said you're actually allowed to work with your friends. But there was no structuring of what types of groups need to be formed or who's going to be the best collaborators for this activity.
Or how to work together. I just wondered if the teacher talked about.
It seemed their goal seemed to be let the students do what they want when they want.
So the teacher really didn't have a role here.
No, the teacher wasn't even mentioned in this.
Okay.
Yeah. So group dynamics. This is what we're looking at: the participants, the groups, the roles, and also group formation mechanism. So in the Rashi and the Wang papers, the users determine their groups, which seem to make sense. However, in CTA, they restricted the groups. As a matter of fact, Tom, in this paper, they actually used the teacher's knowledge to guide the group formation. So the teacher was charged with the task of assigning students who were at the same skill level and knowledge level to work together, because what they found was that students might be intimidated if they're working with someone who seems to be at a higher knowledge level than them. They might not feel like they can be a good peer tutor. We also saw that in Rashi and Wang, the users determined their roles, whereas in CTA, obviously the roles were restricted as tutor and tutee, so there was no flexibility in terms of what role could be assigned. Looking at collaboration cues, which is again borrowing from the sequencing mechanisms of CSCL, we see that there are various types of ways that the initial collaboration could occur. And Rashi was actually interesting because Rashi affords all three types of impetus for collaboration. Students could collaborate at will, or the teacher could encourage collaboration, or the collaboration could be required just based off how the teacher decided to structure the activity. In Wang, obviously the collaboration was at will, because this is all about your natural collaborations, working with who's next to you. And finally, in CTA, because it's peer tutoring, collaboration was required in order to do the task. Similarly, we see that in all three of them, the collaborators determine when they want to communicate. This could be via text or just via verbal communication, which would be the prominent means of communication in Wang. And also in CTA and Rashi, the system prompts students when to collaborate. more so inside of Rashi, where it's taking advantage of one student's content knowledge in order to improve the learning of another student. And in CTA, as we said, it prompts students to collaborate once they're at an incorrect place in their problem solving. When we look at pedagogical guidance, these are borrowed from the tutoring module of ITS and the activities component of CSCL. So users are determining their activities inside of both Ray and Rashi. There's no structure of how they want to enter in their notebook or how they want to approach solving a problem. The users can choose which problem they want to go to and the order that they want to solve these problems. Whereas in CTA, the flow of problem solving is definitely determined by the system. Similarly, in Wei, the students, they have to, their system, there's no system guidance in determining how they collaborate and how support is given. So Wei just allows students to decide how they want to collaborate and how effective their collaboration will be. Whereas in CTA and Rashi, the collaboration support is definitely present. And last, if we look at the technology, borrowing from the user interface module from ITS and the resources and component and the distribution mechanism from CSCL, we see that Rashi and Wei, they allow the students to bring their own tools and determine what tools are best for them at any given time of communication. And in CTA, the students are actually restricted to use those tools for their collaboration. So in peer tutoring, you can't advance in the problem until your partner has okayed your correct answer or your incorrect answer. So you have to use their tools. And like Barbara asked, in Wei and Rashi, theoretically, students could be emailing or texting or phoning each other and still progress in their problem solving without using the system provided tools. Also, Wei is dependent on the physical location of students, unless that is, students are phone calling each other. But students have to be next to each other in order for them to collaborate. But CTA and Rashi, they both support dispersed collaboration. So with that,
Rachel's kind of just go back there.
Yeah.
So it's funny because I would write that as, you sort of, the way you present it, it's like, it's a feature of CTA and Rashi that their collaboration, their independent physical location. And my take on it would be 180 degrees.
Okay.
It would be about they afford face-to-face interaction, they don't afford face-to-face interaction.
I see. Okay.
It's the same thing, but it's a different perspective.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Very different. So with that, I was able just to map it back to this same chart that we saw earlier. And it's very clear that Wang Outpost is all about unstructured collaboration. It's an unstructured kit, whereas Rashi is semi-structured, and the CTA is a fully structured kit. So what about Basilica? Did we forget about Basilica? No, we did not forget about Basilica. Basilica is an architecture, and it allows you to actually make kits of all three different types. But what I did find online was that it's not publicly available. So even though I was excited to actually use it and somehow apply it, it's not available for public use.
I think we can get it. I know.
Oh, you do? So Barbara has
I don't have, I can ask because I know one of the authors really well.
Okay.
She was one of my first PhD students many years ago, on
Whoa.
whose committees I served.
Okay. So
Not
maybe
mine, on her
Carol?
committee. Yes,
Really?
yes.
So we have an inside scoop. We can get it.
Maybe, I don't know.
Okay. So just to wrap things up, if we're looking at kids and learning, so far these 4 papers, they're seeming like they're not quite there yet. There's some potential for kids to actually improve learning gains, perhaps over individual tutoring systems, but it's not yet proven. But what I say is that it just makes sense, given the literature in CSCL and how once group learning is structured properly, how that leads to learning gains. I'm pretty hopeful about how kids can also lead to more effective learning gains. So, as we said, there's some promising results. There's the content recognition, there's the promotion of these productive behaviors, there's an understanding of what processes specifically in peer-to-peer tutoring are most effective. And finally, there's hope that there might be an architecture that allows us to make all different types of kids. So with that, we have several research opportunities. The CTA led us to understand that maybe virtual peer tutoring is a good venue for us to look at. Because the peer tutor often benefited the most in the areas where the peer tutee was suffering, maybe it's better that the peer tutee is actually a virtual peer, so their learning won't be negatively correlated to the peer tutor's learning gains. Also, we see that passive support might be a good area to research, where once Rashi recognizes the content that's there, they might provide some suggested topics list or something that's not direct feedback in order to help the student in their explanation and their exploration of these ill-defined domains. We also can understand from Wang, maybe there's some opportunity to look at how groups are formed and what makes the best groups for these collaborative partnerships, as opposed to just partnering with your friends. Maybe the face-to-face time would be better if you were partnered with somebody else in the classroom whose skill level was the best match for yours. And finally, of course, we see that kids authoring tools, that's a great area for research where kids can be mass deployed and created at a faster rate. So I want to say thank you. I only speak 2 languages. Thank you, merci. And the rest of you guys can see. My references are many. And of course, I've been using pictures throughout, so there's plenty of picture credits. But
From the plagiarism.
yeah.
According to the plagiarism presentation from yesterday, that you cited all of them.
Yeah, exactly. So
For pictures, I'm saying.
you're right. Questions and comments are welcome.
Is it possible that when you use a tutoring system, the gain is going to be negative? When
It's,
you lose something bad,
I'm sure it's possible. I hope that no good research designer would,
No,
let
I
that be
mean-
available in public, but it's possible. Just like you can go to a regular human tutoring session. Have you ever been tutored and you left the session sort of like, what in the world? I'm sure it's possible for the computer as well.
no, you more confused than
Yeah.
before.
Exactly.
I don't think in the tutoring literature there's really negative learning gains or learning, they wouldn't be learning, but certainly there are results in which, using the tutoring system is not better than not using it or,
Right.
or just studying and then, there are results are sometimes are much more nuanced, and so what the ones they call the high gainers, who really start from not much knowledge, and the one who already know a lot. Obviously, if they already know a lot, they won't learn much, and so on and so forth. So
That could be 0 learning gains, probably not negative.
Yeah.
No, I mean, you can, for example, you can go before you have certain rules to solve problems. And those rules work in many cases, but they don't work in some cases, and then they give wrong answers. So when you go to the tutoring system, it kind of shows these wrong answers and says, okay, your initial rules are wrong. Okay.
I suppose.
So that means you can't solve anything. Okay.
I suppose you could introduce misconceptions that it was a bad system, right?
Yeah.
It was
But
they
then-
had a bad domain model.
sorry. But also in general, these tutoring systems are not like deployed. I mean, generally there is some control in the sense, that students that are studying that topic then use the tutoring system. So
Yeah.
Well, I had, Rachel, just one stylistic suggestion for you.
Okay.
When you put the reference number on a slide like 27 and.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Unless you
Yeah.
have a cheat sheet with you.
That was my area. Okay.
That's why I hate the numbered reference system. Period. I just think it's a terrible system. You always have to go look it up, right?
Yeah.
Instead of having the name there,
at least
it's an anchor
the
there.
first name, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when you can get away with it, use the names.
Okay.
Use like APA style instead
Sure,
of
will do.
ACM style. I was going to ask you about the nature of the learning, that the prospects for learning not only about domain understandings in collaborative intelligent tutoring systems, but also learning about collaboration. So you talked about, I don't think that was the goal in any of these systems.
Right.
The goal was always to focus on learning the content. What do you see as the prospects within these systems or extension of these systems for learning how to collaborate? So, I'll be learning about algebra, I'll be learning about other things, but I'll also be learning about ways that I can collaborate with other human beings without necessarily requiring, collaboration support per se.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you look at it, really, it's an interesting goal of these systems, because if they're good enough, then eventually the students should come to the point where they might not need the system because they are effective at helping each other with their own expertise. So I think Rashi comes the closest to it. It seems like the authors in the paper, they really say that one of their goals is to be a coaching agent for students, where they're teaching them how to be better collaborators. So once they recognize the content that one student knows and their one student's expertise, what they want to do is encourage that student somehow to share that expertise with another student. So that's, in a sense, helping the student to be a better collaborator if they can recognize that I know something that might benefit another student. And also their whole structure of critique rebuttal, since that is like a knowledge generative activity, that can be seen as a way to shape the student's skills and collaboration. But I haven't seen anywhere the goal is explicitly like teaching a student, this is how you argue in order to have collaboration. So in terms of the future for these types of systems, I can just see them being more passively supported, which is one of the research opportunities, where they're just building on what one student knows and encouraging them to share it with another student.
But I think you should, you might want to look at the work of Frank Fisher. I don't know if you've ever read any of Frank's stuff. So Frank talks a lot about the difference between external scripts, the kind of scripts that are provided by teachers or by tutoring systems, which are imposed on you, as opposed to the development of your internal scripts. And so it's not just sort of knowing what you know and recognizing the lack of it in somebody else, but actually internalizing those scripts so that you can reuse these as procedural mechanisms. So for instance, in CTA, you might say, well, that introduces a very specific script about grading, about providing feedback around these things. So that's a script I can imagine as a collaborator using in other contexts. I can say, well, we don't have a computer around, but why don't you try to solve the problem and then give it to me and I'll grade it and give you some feedback on it and then we'll swap. So that's a script that I can internalize. It's a pretty simple script.
Got it.
If you look at Frank's stuff, it's really cool.
Okay.
And I think it's a nice extension to what you're talking about here. I think they have much more elaborated scripts about delegation of roles and things like that. That the idea is that you might be able to develop these. So maybe there's a whole family of scripts for how to collaborate, which is a learning which is quite independent from learning about the domain.
Right. I'll look at it.
I think I didn't think about this, but picking up a bit, it might be that Amy Solar's work also had that sort of flavor, not just
she definitely does.
But that would be only collaborative learning, right? Not. But there it would be, even if her work is quite old by now, it would also how to become better collaborators, if I remember correctly.
It was.
Well, you're quoting people like Pierre Chicane and Pierre Dillenborg, who do this sort of stuff too. But I think Frank Fisher, which you didn't have in your paper, would be a really interesting one for you potentially to look at. Frank's a smart guy.
Okay. Any other?
I have one more question, but Prasad.
No, I don't.
So I'm not sure you compare the systems under this dimension, or maybe it was, but it's actually quite different collaborate. So the CTA was not really a collaboration in which they were solving a problem together, right? It was really more of the just now. Okay, I don't want to say it like that, because there is lots of literature that shows that peer tutoring is very good for both tutor and QT. but they were not solving a problem together, right? One of them was solving the problem, and the other giving feedback.
Right.
In the other two systems, instead,
They're working
they
together.
are really working together to come to a solution together, right?
Yes.
That seems.
So
Is that
peer,
correct?
peer critique is a better term.
Yeah.
Is
You're
that,
correct. You're correct.
that's what was going on, right? So that seems like a real
Difference
a
between
real
the systems.
difference between what the two on one side and the other are doing.
Maybe I could even add on that and say, the relationship, there's a clear tutor-to-T relationship in CTA, for
Right.
instance. Whereas in, what was that, in Wei Yang or something, there wasn't a relationship. There's no power relationship,
Yeah,
right?
Right.
there isn't.
It's not that I'm the boss and I'm grading you and checking you, it's that we truly are collaborators. So Barbara makes a really good point.
And I think, I mean, so indirectly you capture that in your structured versus unstructured, I think, but it's not, it's also
Yeah, I understand.
the nature of the collaboration. Yeah.
I mean, you didn't talk about exactly what techniques they use, in the sense, do you see what I mean? Each of them, I don't know, I mean, are they using some kind of learning systems inside, or?
Yeah, so they're building out these intelligent tutoring systems. You mean they're built from the ground up?
Yeah.
Most of them didn't focus on the architecture, but what they wanted to focus on was the learning gains, whether they were achieved or not.
I see.
So Rashi was the closest. Well, when Rashi and Basilica, they were more technical, and that Rashi let us understand how they were doing the knowledge-based mapping.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then Basilica talks about just the overall architectural components and how they're implemented in Java. But CTA and Wang, there's no really an understanding of how their architectures are made.
Oh, I see.
If I can just interject, sorry.
Sure.
CTA and YN come out of two groups that have done this sort of modeling for 20 years. I mean, the Carnegie Learning,
Right.
which is now a company, comes from maybe 30 years of research at Carnegie Mellon. And the other, well, I don't know, maybe 20 years at UMass, whatever it
Well,
was.
it's been a long time.
Yeah, so I think that's why, they sort of probably take they give you just these words about the general model, like
Right.
the model tracing tutor, that's what the Carnegie models are, and they don't,
So they don't tell you exactly what algorithms they're using.
Because it's so established.
unless, that's one thing, or unless, they focus like on, I don't know, the new feature that they added, and then
Right.
they tell you,
How's it implemented?
I think, that they did 20 years ago.
Right,
so-
right.
But now, the focus is now, so that's really a lower level component in some sense,
Right.
that's kind of a given component. The algorithmic issues here are how to allocate tasks to people, how to do things like that, so it's at the plane of collaboration, not at the plane of, not at the layer of ultimate, domain knowledge or strategies for teaching about domain knowledge. So Rachel, if there was a row in your categorization scheme that said role of teacher, because all these were enacted in formal learning contexts. So if there was a line down there that said role for teacher, what would it have said in each of these cases? None, and none?
That's good. It seems like, this teacher, they help to form the pairs or
Okay.
form the groups. That was the only role that the teachers had in each of these papers. So whether they were saying you guys are going to be the peer tutor and tutee, or saying in Rashi that this is going to be the group that's trying to diagnose this patient. Outside of that, the teacher didn't have an active role that was mentioned.
So what do you think of that?
I love teaching. I think that intelligent tutoring systems, I guess part of their role is to eliminate the need for the human. Maybe not, but I guess they can be effective without the teacher being there if they're good systems. So
Do you think there might be potential though to add value for by virtue of the fact that you have a knowledgeable educator who works with children
yeah,
there as a resource there in the room, so I want to hear you say that it's a missed opportunity maybe to,
Yeah.
and to find a role for teachers, even in the context of, largely automated systems like this. It seems like we're paying them a lot of money if all they're doing is choosing which groups to put kids in.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So there must be, I'm saying we can get more out of them. That there's
You're
more.
right. In CSCL, there's a lot more emphasis seemingly on the teacher's role, but what I've found in ITS so far is not as much emphasis on the teacher and how they can help. But you're right. There's an area.
If I can interject once more, so,
Yeah.
and express my opinion. Well, so I was shaking my head because intelligent tutoring systems really are not meant to take the place of the teacher. Are meant to be support, 24/7 availability and all those sort of things, right? And then. And then the way that, for example, the geometry algebra tutor, the CTA, some variation thereof now because they have many in the classroom, so they are often used for tutoring system. I don't know the collaboration, but often used in laboratory session with the teacher going around and trying to. So, but I don't know in this particular case.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious the extent to which these authors had addressed the role of the teacher. Because I agree with you, it'll be the guide on the side kind of thing. And I assume what the teacher's really doing is walking around to these pairs as they're interacting with each other in like Wang or something like that. And saying, what are you guys doing? If somebody has a problem, if the intelligent tutor isn't providing all the support that they need, the teacher can step in and fill in. I'm sure that happens.
Right.
But it's interesting. I like to see people at least make explicit reference to it. Not you, I mean the authors.
Wouldn't this be something you have control for that too? So it seems like
Depends whether you're teaching or running an experiment.
Exactly. So, when you back to these papers, it's probably not going to be something you would do or would want.
Well, then I'd like them to say that explicitly, that we would have, I'm just trying, I don't know, it's a little dystopic, the notion to me of if everybody's sitting there with their headphones on, working on their computers while the kid next to them is available for talking.
You mentioned that they did things like that in YM because they wanted to study natural collaborations, but did they videotape them and then analyze the videotapes or something like that, or they didn't do anything of that sort?
I've only seen photos, but I'm not sure if they have video. But there seem to be like ample photos. And Tom, you're right, because the teacher is like normally present in the photos and talking to the students. But I don't know if they were videotaped.
No, because I remember you mentioned, that the author was in particular interested in natural collaboration, but then did they analyze this natural collaboration? I mean, so there is what they did with the system, right? But then there is what they were doing, talking to each other. So did they analyze any of that?
No, not in this paper. The only way that they analyzed it was looking at the timestamps of the students and when they were working on the problem. And from there, they sort of guessed that students were probably collaborators if they were working on a certain amount of problems at the same time, more than the average number of problems that students happen to work on at the same time. So it was a little hacky, I thought.
Yeah.
But there was no video mention of like looking at like maybe their language and communication with each other.
Can I just ask one more question? Did you mention in the CTA, I call it,
It's a funny name.
in the alphabet tutor. Yeah, in the alphabet tutor, how much was the chat used? Did they say?
In CTA, which is the peer tutoring, or are you talking about?
The alphabet tutor. Yeah, there was a chat window over to the left. So you can interact with your partner.
Oh yeah, in the CTA,
Besides
when
just
you're
grading
doing
their stuff.
they didn't mention how much was it used, but it seemed like whenever students needed help, that's how they requested for help via chat. But I'm not sure the rate or the amount that it was used.
Yeah, I just wonder how rich that discourse was
Yeah.
compared to face-to-face discourse.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Well, thank you guys again. Appreciate it.
Okay. So I think everybody else has to clear out for a few minutes.
Otherwise,